in Germany or Russia 80 years ago.
Nigel just compared modern Britain to Nazi Germany because they shut his bank account down.
Nigel's conspiracies.
This is Nigel FARAGE. I believe him to be a conspiracy theorist, and he's now going on a rant about why his bank has closed his accounts, and we're going to look into that.
We are closing your accounts.
What you're about to see unfold in front of you is Nigel showing his true conspiracy theory colours because Coots have responded and given reason as to why Nigel was banned. That's right, the BBC have delved into this, and they've come up with some interesting conclusions, as well as by the looks of it having spoken to Coots to find out as to why Nigel's been banned.
Nigel FARAGE fell below the financial threshold required to hold an account at Coots, the prestigious private bank for wealthy customers, the BBC has been told. It also understood that he was offered a normal account at NatWest, which owns Coots. People familiar with the matter rejected the notion that the decision to close his Coots account was in any way political.
It was for commercial reasons. The criteria for holding a Coots account are clear from the bank's website.
Coots requires customers to borrow or invest £1 million with the bank or hold £3 million in saving. Mr. FARAGE recently posted a 6-minute video on Twitter saying that losing his bank account was the equivalent of being a non-person, and that the decision may fundamentally affect my future career and whether I can even go on staying living here in this country. Mr. FARAGE disputed the fact that he was offered a NatWest account at the time his Coots accounts were withdrawn. He says offer of a NatWest account came late last week. The offer of a NatWest account still stands. The BBC understands. Mr. FARAGE says that he has tried to open an account with a number of other banks, but claims he was rejected on the grounds that he is a politically exposed person, PEP. A PEP generally presents a higher risk for financial institutions as regulators. Consider PEPs more exposed to the risk for potential involvement in bribery and corruption by virtue of their position and the influence they may hold. People familiar with NatWest's thinking insisted that this not the reason for the closure of his Coots account.
There's a bit more from the BBC tweets, but before we go into that, I'm going to go into detail about some of the political claims that have been thrown at Nigel FARAGE. Nigel claims this is all due to him leading the campaign for Brexit and that Brexit has failed, so the banks have come out for revenge. Except Brexit happened in 2016 and nothing happened since then. But also, have a listen to all the claims that have been thrown at Nigel since 2016.
The Electoral Commission and the European Parliament should now investigate the finances of Nigel Farage and his Brexit party. You know, democracy is undermined, and he says the election is about democracy. Democracy is undermined if we have undeclared, unreported, untraceable payments being made to the Brexit party, if we have the potential for underhand and under-the-counter payments being made. You see, this is not a party in the ordinary sense. This is a private company. It's run by Nigel FARAGE. Donations go through PayPal, and he's not going to be remembered, you know, as he wants, as the man of the people. He's going to be remembered as the man of the PayPal, because that's where the money is coming from, and that's where it's going. And now we find the Brexit party. The Brexit party that has been formed is not a party, it's actually a private company. It doesn't have members, it has shareholders. The key shareholder with the controlling interest is Nigel FARAGE. And you pay money not to become a member, but to become a supporter, and you pay through PayPal, and you cannot discover whether the money is coming from foreign sources or British sources. Indeed, you can pay to this party in Russian rubles, American dollars, Malaysian ringgit, and of course, probably to his disdain, euros as well, to join that Brexit party.
You pride yourself on being an ordinary man in touch with the people, but are you in fact a kept man?
I'm fighting a European election campaign. You can bore on with whatever you want to bore on.
It's a legitimate question about the money that you were paid by Arron Banks between 2016 and 2017, funding your lifestyle and your political operation to the tune of almost £500,000 that year.
3 or 4 times that, I'd have thought.
So £13,000 for the house in Chelsea paid for by Arron Banks? True or not true?
So is there a European election next week?
Yeah, we'll ask about that in a minute.
Good.
But can we talk about the money? Can we talk about the money for a second?
No, not really.
So £5,000 for the bodyguard and driver a month. £13,000 for the house in Chelsea a month. You said in 2017 that you were skint, that there was no money in politics, but there clearly was quite a lot of money in it for you, wasn't there? Yes or no? Why do you want to talk about these things? I mean, none of this is illegal, but this is important. You're running for public office. It's a matter of transparency.
It certainly is. We've got a democratic election next Thursday, which is all about democracy, and you won't even talk about it.
You rail against the elite, the metropolitan elite in London.
I rail against people like you. You're
Exactly.
quite right.
And yet you're living the lifestyle of the elite, or you were,
What?
financed by very rich friends.
Terrible, isn't it?
No comment on this?
None at all.
Nigel, who's paying for all this now? Is Aaron Banks still paying for some of it? Who's paying for all this now, Nigel? Nigel, one more time, just for the record, who's paying for this operation now, for all your bodyguards?
Russians.
Your expenses and your financial arrangements. I heard you on Radio 4 saying that you'd submit to a full audit. You've reverse ferreted on that on the grounds that other MEPs don't. So these are the transparency arrangements that all Labour MEPs sign up for. Can you sign up for those today?
Yeah, they don't actually. What they do is they have an auditor
More than you.
make sure they spend the money in accordance with the rules.
Yes.
There are no expenses.
But you say that as if there's something wrong with it. They have an auditor to make sure they spend the money in accordance with the rules.
Sorry, we have an agreement about timing. You've massively...
This is
hang on.
Patrick O'Flynn, UKIP's Director of Communications and former political commentator on the Daily Express. Is this a friend in the media or a member of the political class?
There are no expenses. These are allowances, fixed rate allowances, which I've spent in accordance with the rules.
So will you go for the audit that all Labour MEPs go for?
We will make a decision en masse.
Yeah, well, yes or
after
no,
this
Nigel,
election,
you're in charge.
But I'm very suspicious of the word audit used in that context.
Are you?
Isn't it funny, since 2014, he's been on a salary of about $450,000 a year, or at least that's according to Channel 4. And yet he seems to be able to promote himself as a man of the people, an average Joe. And in his diatribe of nonsense, he tries to convince people that if it can happen to him, it can happen to you. But the fact is, Nigel's finances have dropped, and he's made a big doo-doo of it on public television, showing that he's a conspiracy theorist. But at the same time, he's also going around demanding empathy for him being really wealthy, or not wealthy enough, to bank at Coutts. It's almost like listening to this from Megatron.
Grant me mercy, I beg of you. You, who are without mercy, now plead for it? I thought you were made of sterner stuff.
Let's have a listen to the interview and then start to dissect what he's actually said, but also the chilling fact that he puts his foot in his mouth over and over again, as well as spouting potential conspiracy theories.
2 months ago, I get a phone call out of the blue from a personal manager who simply says on a phone call, "We are closing your accounts." I asked why, no reason was given.
Now, if the reason was down to money laundering, they wouldn't be able to tell him anyway, because he might then go and tell people who are involved in that money laundering that the banks are out to get them.
I was told it would all be explained in a letter that would arrive in a couple of days' time. The letter just told me the accounts are closing, and please, by the date they gave me, make sure you've moved to another bank. I did inquire further within the group. I sent an email to the chairman, and I got someone ring me up and say it's purely a commercial decision. I thought. So I've tried for 2 months to get another bank account, and I've spoken to 7 different banks, and they've all said no. And the reason is, it would seem to be political.
Bear in mind, since 2014, people have been claiming there's something dodgy going on with his money. And he's just turned around in that interview and claimed that it's now that people have decided to act, not the fact that he can't keep up with the high amounts of money demanded by his bank to be part of that banking group. No, it must be the bank out to get him.
Person called a PEP, a politically exposed person. It was a term that came into our law as a result of our membership of the European Union. So it could be purely political. It could be, of course, prejudice. After all, I'm pretty used to prejudice.
Yes, he is, but normally it's him dishing out the prejudice, not receiving it. Giver, not a taker.
I do not understand why you use words like Romanian when describing who you would and would not want to live next door to. I don't understand why you're uncomfortable listening to foreign languages when your own wife and children speak them. And I don't understand why you talk about problems in primary schools that are caused by children like your own.
Prejudice that comes from the establishment against me.
Or like the time he replicated Nazi propaganda. Here's his apology for that.
Your poster has been taken by many people as deeply offensive, upsetting, racist, anti-Muslim. Would you like to apologise to them tonight?
Well, you know, I issued a very similar poster to that 2 months before with very little debate.
Starting to see a pattern here. He claims he's being attacked for prejudice, and yet he's the one stoking prejudice in the streets. He complains about a lack of empathy, and yet he gives none to those suffering the most. And his entire justification is that it's because he's political, and potentially because people view him as a racist bigot arsehole. But it doesn't end there. Nigel goes on about Russia, and it's interesting to see that he brings this topic up because he blames Chris Bryant for bringing up this issue. And yet I've shown you clips from 2014 to 19 where people have suggested that Nigel's finances are pretty dodgy.
But I also worried very much that what was said in the House of Commons last year by Chris Bryant, Member of Parliament for South Wales, Labour member, Chairman of the Privileged Committee, who used parliamentary privilege to say that in a calendar year I'd received £500,000 from the Kremlin.
I don't understand why Aaron Banks, frankly, isn't on the list either. Even Isabel Oakeshott now thinks that he is an agent of influence for the Russian state. And I simply point out that Nigel Farage received from Russia today £548,000, £573 in 2018 alone from the Russian state.
Here's Nigel on Russia Today, a TV programme that was clearly run by Putin to broadcast Russian propaganda.
To knight Mr. Farage, if you would like to kneel there.
Come on then. Don't hurt me. Well, thank you.
You are now Sir Nigel Farage. We're also making you honorary British ambassador to America and honorary MP for South Thanet because they didn't elect you for real. So arise, Sir Nigel.
Thank you very much. I'm honoured.
My mummy says you hate foreigners.
No, little girl. No.
This was done under parliamentary privilege. I appealed to the Speaker, I appealed to Mr. Bryant, but there'd been no retraction whatsoever. It's rather like living in Germany or Russia 80 years ago, or perhaps even communist China today. I wonder, are we living in communist China today in this country?
Fascinating. A country he loves so much, backed by the head of state, which he also loves and sings proudly about. But he's comparing us now to Russia and China. It's always when it suits, and Nigel twists very easily in whatever direction suits him. Here are the rest of those tweets that I promised.
Mr. Farage told the BBC, "Are you telling me that all the other banks say it was a PEP thing and Coutts wasn't? Draw your own conclusions." Mr. Farage also said that his business account for Thorn in the Side Limited was closed despite the fact that last year he had what he described as large, significant positive cash balances going through his business account. Coutts do not offer business banking services to customers who are not also private customers.
And it seems to be all one way. It seems to be all against people who have traditionalist or conservative views. There is something totally outrageous going on here. So I've been considering over the course of a day my options. I've spent time talking to lawyers. I've been considering legal action. I've been asking myself whether, frankly, it's even worth staying in this country.
Where have we heard that before?
If Brexit is a disaster, I will go and live abroad. I'll go and live somewhere else. But you know what, Tony? Do you know what, Tony? It isn't going to be a disaster. We've just.
What do you think? Is Nigel a conspiracy theorist? Have I got it completely wrong? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And once again, thank you so much to everyone who watches this channel and supports it financially. It keeps it growing and going. For everyone else, bye for now.
I don't know precisely what the reason is, but the reason is, it would seem to be political. I don't know precisely what the reason is, but the reason is, it would seem to be political.